Even though they are very similar, Figma and Framer do have certain differences. And in this video, we will look at Framer's UI and compare it to Figma to highlight both the differences and similarities so that we can gain the confidence needed to create beautiful, responsive web pages inside of Framer. Now, let's waste no more time and get straight into it. All right, everyone. So here we are inside of the Framer dashboard, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the Framer dashboard because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The meaty stuff is when we actually create a project, right? So if we go here and we scroll down, you can see that I have a bunch of projects already. If I want to create a new project, I just go to New. When I click New, I get this popover, and here I can choose a blank site, so starting from nothing, but I could also choose to start from something, so start from a certain kind of template. And I could choose starter site, I could choose Boost, SAS, or whatever I want. And they actually have a bunch of different cool templates here, so I would suggest that you scroll this through to see if there is something that actually looks similar to what you want to create, because then you don't have to start from scratch. For this tutorial, we're gonna go with the Boost template. So I'll hover it and I'll click Use Template. And this is what we see when we go into the template. We can see 3 different frames here, so desktop, tablet, and phone. We can see some components over here and the full page in itself. Now, we're not going to go much into these things. We're going to look at the UI components within Framer and see how they resemble Figma, what the differences are, what the similarities are, like I said before. If we start with the first panel in the top here, we have something called Insert. This is your panel for inserting stuff that is already pre-created. So anything from pre-created sections that we can drag onto our canvas, to navigation, so top bars, footers, collection lists that you can use for blogs or team pages or just regular pages, to elements like audio, so you could drag in a Spotify player, a SoundCloud player. You could drag in forms, so from FormSpark or HubSpot or Intercom chats. You could use external icon libraries straight from Framer, so material design icons or hero, Memoji, etc. We could also use interactive elements created by Framer, so they have their own carousel component, a ticker component, a slideshow. Then you have something called patterns, and this is actually components pre-created by Framer as well. So we have avatars and buttons and cards like this. And really nothing here in this insert menu is something that we have in Figma. So like pre-made components like this, we don't really have in Figma. You can go to the Figma community tab and grab stuff like this, but natively, just from the get-go, you don't really have these things inside of Figma. And you have social things, you have utility things. So you would have embedded components if you want to embed certain things to your website. If you have a Gumroad link, you want to have certain kinds of table booking, you could use the fork, or sign up for an event, you could use Eventbrite. All of these things are provided by Framer in this insert tab. Even videos. So here we have a YouTube component, Vimeo, custom video if you want to upload your own videos, Lottie files, and Giphy. So as you can see, this insert tab is great for getting started with pre-made things. So that's the insert tab. Then we have layout up here, and this is a way for us to create different kinds of layouts. So for example, rows here would just be what we call auto layouts in Figma. So a row would be a vertically stacked auto layout. Then we have columns, which would be a horizontally stacked auto layout. We have wrap, we have the normal grid, we have grid row, where you have the left side taking up 2 columns in height and the right side being 2 separated columns, and this one being the other way around. So that's the layout button up here in the top bar. So you can click these and then just go to your canvas here and add it like this. We then have a frame, which would be exactly the same thing as the Figma frame. We click it and we can create a frame just as in Figma. We have text, and like you guessed, it's the same thing as in Figma. We can write something here with our text, just like that. So also the same thing as in Figma. And then we have the CMS thing again, as I said. And when we click it, we go to this separate page where we can add our different CMS pages, our different CMS categories. You can see here a bunch of options. I'm not going to go into the CMS settings here, but like I said, this is a content management system. So it allows us to add things to our pages that we then dynamically can change from one spot. Now let's look at the left sidebar here. So the first thing we see, and this is also something we have in Figma, but it's not exactly the same thing. So we have our pages. We have our home page, then we have the landing page. It's a separate page, very much as in Figma. When we click different pages, we can look at different canvases. So it's not one shared canvases. We can divide things onto different canvases. Now, the difference with Framer is that these pages are actually real pages, real website pages. You can see the slash here indicating that this is a URL. So all of these are live pages that we can link to. If we scroll down, we can see the CMS pages. So these are their own category. And in the bottom, we have something called Canvas. And Canvas is ultimately just a design playground. So this would be more like what Figma has, just a design canvas, not a live responsive website canvas. So in here, we could do exactly what we can do in the web pages, just that here, nothing is going to be published to the live website. Second thing, layers. And this is also exactly the same thing as we have in Figma. You can see the tree structure here. If I create something, so if I create a frame here, you can see that it ends up here in the tree structure. If I create another frame, then we have another frame within this tree structure. The icons vary a bit, but they are very much similar. You can see this here is a component, and this is the exact same component symbol as we have in Figma. Now, this is the symbol for an icon in Framer, so that's different. Many things look the same, some things don't look the same. If I create an auto layout or a stack, as we call it in Framer, out of this, so add stack, you would see this symbol. If we change it from being direction horizontal to vertical, it would change its appearance to this. If we change it to a grid, it would change it to a grid view like this. So that's layers, pretty much the same as Figma, some small changes. If we click assets, this is also a menu that we have in Figma, but it doesn't look exactly the same. First of all, we have our components here, and our components are divided into project components. These are components we've created ourselves inside of our project. So this is nothing that is provided by Framer out of the box. These are our own components. But then we have something called default, which would be external icon libraries, for example. So if we go back to insert, all of these would be considered default in that menu. So let's go back here. And then we have Framer. So these are things provided by Framer. I mean, the icon libraries are also provided by Framer, but they're not considered Framer components in this menu. So we have FormSpark, we have Google Maps, we have Loader, the ticker component that we could find in here as well. Let me see if we just search ticker. So this one, and so forth. If we scroll down a bit, we come to something called styles. And this is also something we have in Figma. We have text styles, right? But in Framer, they work a bit differently. So you can see here, we have a bunch of styles. We have everything from heading 1 to heading 6. We have quote, we have feature. Here you can add whatever you want, just as in Figma. But the difference here is if I click on heading 1 here, I get this menu. Here in Framer, one of the bigger differences is that any one of our text styles have built-in responsiveness. So you can see here type, and it says L, M, and S. And here we have different sizes and different settings depending on size. So that's a big difference when it comes to Framer text styles. And you can even see that some of these don't have breakpoints. So you could choose to remove the breakpoints. And if you want to re-add them, you just click add breakpoints here. But that's the biggest change with text styles in Framer. Now, we also have something called link. So if we click on articles here and we get this menu, in here we only get color options and decoration options for the different states. So we have the default state, we have the hover state, and we have the current state. This is not something that is provided inside of Figma. Inside of Figma, we would create components that have these different states. And in Framer, well, we have them out of the box like this. In the bottom here, you can see code. If we click code, we get this little popover menu that allows us to create a code file. And just to show you, if I say test, I can create a new component or a new override. We're not going to get into the details of what's the difference between these two, but let's create a new component for now. Let's call it test. If I create that, I go to this test.tsx file. And here we can create things that we can't create on the canvas itself. So if we want to add some custom code, if we want to add external libraries, if we want to add any kind of code behavior from the outside that we can't achieve from Framer's UI itself, well, then we can use this code component here. Like I said, we're not going to go too deep into this. So let's go back here to assets. I click on the breadcrumb and let's move over to the top again. And in the middle part of the top here, we have the name. If I click it, I can change the name, Framer tutorial. I can change which folder it is in here. So that's the middle part. If I click here, I can see that it's just me in the file currently. Here we have the settings tab. Inside of the settings tab, we have a bunch of options. So in general here, we can see site title, site language, site description. These are all SEO settings, so website specific settings. So you can see the preview link if you would link this in, for example, a chat app. This is what you would see. And a bunch of options, site images, social image, what happens if we link this in Messenger, for example, then it will show this preview, password protection, we have Google Analytics, and we can add custom code in here as well. We have domain settings, we have redirects. So all of these things are site specific settings. Versions, what version is it for our website? We have even our own analytics, and we have the plans, so your current Framer plan. And then we can go into each and every single page here and change the SEO settings as well. But that's the settings tab. We can also invite people. This is also very much like Figma's UI. You can invite people to the file. And then to the furthermost right here, we have preview. So we can, if we go back to pages here, go to home, we can click preview. We can click preview here, and we're gonna load our website and get a live preview of what it looks like. So you can see here, all the states, everything is interactive and it's just smooth as butter. We can change from responsive to scale to fit. So we see the whole website like that. We can change the width just through this menu here. We can drag these handles if we want to do it dynamically like that with just our cursor. We can reload. We can even hide the UI here, get it back by clicking here, and then close it down here once again. So those are most of the options on the top bar. We also have this publish option. So when we click that, we actually publish our site to a URL that we can then share and unpublish at any time. So if I click publish, now our website is published. So we get this random domain from Framer as a default. We can change that to our own custom domain. Obviously, this is not something we have in Figma because Figma is just the design canvas. But yeah, so if I click on this link here, I go to the website. And now this is the exact thing a user would see from this browser. In my case here, from a Brave browser, this is exactly what the website will look like, because now this is a live website. So if we go back, the last thing I want to cover is the right sidebar. And this part is also very similar to Figma. So if we just target an element here, so I've targeted this row in our layers, you can see in the top, we have our alignment settings, very much like what we have in Figma. We can align things in the way we want to. We also have something called overlays. This is not something you will see in Figma because this is Framer specific. So if you want to add like a YouTube video that comes up like a faded out overlay like this, you could do that on the click of a button here. So you can see we have different presets. It could be a fade in kind of transition, and we can say that it should be dismissible or not. So that's overlay. And then we have something called link. I can remove the overlay for now. We have link, and this is just a way for us to link our items to different places on our website. So I could say that this button should link to a certain place, or even this whole container here should link to a certain place on our website. So maybe to contact one, and I could say that it should link to a new tab. Now, we don't have anything that is exactly like this in Figma, but we do have the opportunity or the ability to create prototypes in Figma. So then we could link to different frames on our page. But here in Framer, we link to actual pages instead. Then we have position. And position is also something that we do not really have in this way in Figma. We do have absolute position. So you could take an element. So for example, if you have an auto layout with things stacking up based on this auto layout, if you want something to break the flow inside of that auto layout, you could use absolute positioning inside of Figma. So if we click here, you have something called absolute. That would be the same setting. But here in Framer, since it's a real website, we do have more CSS properties to play around with as well. Then we have sizing, and this is also something we have in Figma. So we can go to width. We can set it to be fixed. So we can set a fixed pixel value, for example, so 450 pixels. Or we could say that it should fill, just the way we can do in Figma. We could say that it should fit, just the way we can do in Figma. But we could also set it to be relative, and this is not something we have in Figma currently. And relative is another CSS property that is very much used on the web when you create websites. The same would go for height. We can change between different values. And when it comes to height, we also have something called viewport. Also another CSS property that would allow us to base an object, an element, or a container, or whatever, base its height on the viewport height. So if we have a mobile screen that is 700 pixels in height, then if we would take viewport and say 100% or 100 VH, then this container here, this rows container, would take up that full viewport. And it would do the same for a desktop device that maybe has 2000 pixels in height. It will depend on the height of the screen. Also for sizing, we can add things like min width, max height, min height, and max width, which allows us to say that this particular container, for example, shouldn't exceed this pixel value. This is not something we can do in Figma. And that's pretty much it for sizing. Then we have layout. And for layout, we very much like with Figma, if we set something to be an auto layout, which once again is called stacks inside of Framer, then we can play around with the settings. So we have direction, very much like in Figma. So we can have horizontal direction, or we could have a vertical direction. We could distribute our content. In here, we have a couple of more options than we have in Figma, but it pretty much resembles what you can do in Figma as well here. We have alignment tools, so you can align things center, right, left. We have something called wrap, which is a CSS property that allows you to set the behavior of a container to wrap items or not. Then we have padding, also very much like in Figma. We can add padding to our containers like this. We can choose specific sides where we want padding. So maybe we want more padding in the top. We can change the bottom padding like this. We also have something called effects, and I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is a way for us to add animations to different parts of our website. So if I click plus here, we have scroll speed. So this would allow us to create parallax effects or parallax animations in Framer. We have scroll transform, so that something happens to an element while we scroll. We have scroll variant, and we also have an appear animation here. As you can see, if I click this, we can say that the trigger should be that on appear, when this layer appears in view, or when this section itself appears in view, then something is going to happen. And we can use one of the presets, or we could just enter our own custom presets here. I have a full tutorial on this exact topic if you want to check it out in the top right corner. Then we have styles. So very much like in Figma, we can change the opacity of our elements. We can change if it should be shown or hidden. We can change the fill of our container here. We can say that it should be overflow hidden or visible. In Figma, we call it clip content. Here we call it overflow, which is the name of the CSS property. And if we choose hidden, that would be the same as clipping content in Figma. And we could also choose to have it scroll, also something we have as an option in Figma. We can change the radius, very much like we can in Figma. We can rotate it, also something that you can do in Figma. Borders, very much a part of our beloved Figma tool. And shadows, also very much a part of our beloved Figma tool. But here, unlike Figma, where you always have to add multiple shadows if you want to create a realistic shadow, well, in Framer, we can add one shadow and just hit realistic. and it will add a realistic, more deep shadow to your element. We can choose outside, inside for shadows. We can choose the color and the opacity of this shadow in here, the X and Y axis, very much like in Figma. And then we have some more CSS properties here like diffusion, and this is just for realistic, and focus. So if we change to box, we go back to the normal settings like blur and spread instead. And then we go over to scroll section. And here you can give your different sections a scroll section name. And if I call this section 1, what I now can do is I can take a button, and when I click that button, I can say that it should send us to section 1, just because I added section 1 here in scroll section. And then we can add some offset. So if we have, for example, this nav bar here that is a couple of pixels, maybe we want it to scroll a bit further, then we could add those additional pixels in here. So this is a Framer native thing because it is usually a web design tool native thing. We have accessibility tools. So area label, this is for screen readers. So when someone who doesn't really see, if they tab through a website and they come to an element, what should that element be described as? We would add that as an area label. We could also determine where in the tab count should it appear. Should it appear on number 1 tab or 2 tab or 3 tab? And we could tag it. So for example, if this is a text here that we want to be an H1, then it would be tagged H1. But if we want it to be H2, we would change it to H2 in here. And the last, or actually second to last piece would be code overrides. This is similar to the code component, but it has more to do with actually overriding something that you already created on the canvas. So that you can do from here. Also Framer native, so not something you would see in Figma. But the last part, the handoff, is something that looks very much like what you would see in the inspect tab of Figma. And in here you can change from CSS, so to see the actual CSS, or you can change to JSX, which would be the JavaScript code instead. And then you can just copy it like this. And the last part here that I want to cover is the select tool that we're currently on. We have the hand tool to move things around. You could do this by just hitting space as well. And we have the comment tool, just as we have in Figma. If you want to add comments to a specific place, you would hit that, click here, write a comment, publish it, and you would see it in this comment field here. Now you're ready to set up a project, and I just happen to have a video on that you can check out here somewhere. Until the next one, have a great life. We'll talk soon. Ciao.